Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 982. My opponent started off here with e4 and I went with c5, the Sicilian. And we played the main line for quite a while here. Knight f3, d6, d4, I take, he takes. All very standard, the open Sicilian. Knight c3, and now here I diverge a little bit. The most popular line is a6, the knight Orff. But knight c6, the second choice here. It's a little bit offbeat. Sometimes it catches people by surprise. Of course, there are many ways to play this. E6, the Scheveningen, or G6, the dragon. Also interesting ways to play, but I played this one. And now the main moves here are bishop g5, attacking the knight, or bishop to c4, coordinating or looking at the f7 square. Both of those are usually met with the move pawn to e6. Or white can play with bishop to e2. It's kind of a more positional way to play. Anyway, all that is interesting. Bishop e3 is often played by players who are going for an English attack. And I think e5 is a good answer here. You can also try knight g4 here to harass the bishop, since white never played f3. Although, yeah, that's probably a good move too. The knight from g4 can come back to the to the e5 square after that bishop is moved away. So, but e5 is also a good move here. Just kick the knight, and usually it goes back in my experience. I think knight b3, in spite of that question mark, I think knight b3 is a good square for it. In this position, also knight f3. Knight d to b5 is probably not so great. It gets kicked around. It's an idea from the Sveshnikov, I guess, but white and black can keep pushing those pawns forward, threaten the fork there, and I think it's a little trickier for white than the typical Sveshnikov, so not as good. And knight takes c6. I think this is a slight mistake. So at this point, I would say black has equalized. And let's see, we get out of the book here when I play bishop e6. So let's just look at this view here. Yeah, I think black has got an equal game at this point. And we stay equal for a while here. He castles. I do some normal development. The thing about that exchange is it dragged the pawn forward from the b file to the c file. So now I can get in this move d5 at some point. And I was just preparing to set it up. So white strikes preemptively with f4 to stop that idea. But this has its own problems. And in fact, white needs to be careful here. Bishop takes f4 is a mistake, because it's giving up this diagonal. And actually, I could have won a pawn here. So I missed my chance. He needs to take with the rook here, and then it's still even position. But he took with the bishop. And now I could play queen b6 check. Sometimes you don't want to go pawn grabbing, but this seems to be fine for white. Let's see, queen d3. I was looked at this a little bit, and then my queen comes over here to a3. Queen d3 is getting out of the way so the rooks can come over. But anyway, I'm just a pawn up in this position. My queen is relatively safe at the moment. So I should have done that. Anyway, he took with the bishop. I just castled. And then he went e5. So again, this is a second chance for me to do something about that tactic. The chess engine likes taking first, and then queen a5, hitting the bishop, and then dropping back queen b6 with a check and picking up the pawn again. So once again, it looks like I'm just a pawn up here. If I play this correctly, so white made a mistake. Well, made one mistake basically, and left it on the board for a while, and I never took advantage of it. And instead I traded queens, which I thought would leave me in a decent position. I've got the bishop pair with open lines, but he has the bishop pair too. I wasn't thinking entirely clearly. So this is basically an even position again. Let's see, go bishop c5 check. Let's see, he does have some weaknesses around his king, but on the other hand, I have these weak pawns on the queen side. So compensating weaknesses, and it's still about even. Instead of king h1, it actually starts to get complicated very quickly here, surprisingly. You think the queens are off and it's going to get simpler. but it doesn't. And actually, the chess engine is recommending that White should at least consider simplifying things like this. Just go for this trade and playing on in about an even position. It seems like the tactics here start to favor black just a little bit, but it's a little bit dangerous for White to tuck his king in the corner like that. Let's see, I continue with knight g4. He didn't trade. I was really expecting him to trade, so I would get the bishop here. Instead, he went knight e4 and kicked my bishop. So it is a bit tricky. This is where the tactics really start to kick in. I mean, I was threatening knight to f2 check with the fork. I was also threatening knight to e3 with the fork. But he did a counter threat. This knight is hitting my loose bishop. And, oh yeah, and another thing I didn't realize, but I was also threatening knight takes bishop. So anyway, if I take his bishop and he takes my bishop, it's all pretty even. He might even follow up with taking this bishop. So I dropped my bishop back. That seems to be good. And then he did take on g4 at this point. So I did end up with the bishop pair and a bit of a tempo on this rook. And now, and White's next move is a blunder. This is where the tactics, I guess you could say, they get out of control. They start to get beyond our capability to calculate in this Blitz game. So White really needed to defend. There is this potential skewer here, which I had spotted. White has two loose pieces lined up on the e-file, and he needs to come over and defend one of them so the other can move away. Instead, he activated his rook. I mean, it's a good thought. You want to activate your pieces, but it fails tactically. And I had seen this move in the game. I saw this move, and I thought, oh, this was good. And then I said, but he has a counter threat like this, rook g3. Now, if I take the bishop, he takes my bishop and defends his knight. So that looked like that was all over. Although, if I were to go ahead a couple steps more, there was also the possibility of a pawn fork there. So I just wasn't calculating deeply enough. This, in fact, is winning for me. So I should have played it. And the chess engine would play, it wouldn't take right away. What it would do is it would defend the bishop. And then if White attacks it, then I can grab the bishop. And if he grabs the bishop, then I can take here and take the knight and be a piece up. Although the chess engine gives this line. You take here, let the rook take, and then rook h5 check. That is a whole nother idea I didn't think of, but this is looks like it's leading to mate in short order there. So anyway, that would be cool. So the point is that there's no good defense here, and White is losing material. So that was the point of this h5 move, opening up the h-file, rather than just grabbing material right away. So I didn't calculate deeply enough. I just saw, well, I threaten his bishop, he threatens my bishop, I take his bishop, he takes my bishop. And, when he threatens my bishop, I can't move my bishop out of the way because when his rook comes here, it's coordinating with his bishop on the g7 square, which is a very dangerous check. So I played f5, kicking his knight, but that's a mistake, and now I think we're back to even, or maybe White's better. Anyway, he goes knight g5. I think it's about even. I go rook e8, harassing his bishop. He went bishop back to c3, and I went bishop e2 here, taking advantage of the fork. But this is the mistake. Yeah, this is where White is better again. When I did that series about chess mistakes of an A player, I made some rules about to help remind myself of to be more aware in tactical situations. And one of the rules is the rule of two. So I was so worried about bishop here and rook here coordinating on the g7 that I forgot there was a second way to do it. The bishop here, the rook comes here and coordinates on g7. So, I played this very carefully waiting to a point in time where he couldn't play rook g3 and threaten g7. I waited till that was true before I played that fork, which had been sitting there for a while. And but I forgot about the rule of two. There's a second way for him to attack that pawn there and make that threat. So the rule of two is very handy. It applies to rooks, to bishops, and to knights. And of course, queens have many ways of attacking a square, but it's often the case that if a knight wants to attack a square over here, there's two ways to get to it, right? He can go here, or he can go here to get to this square. And it makes kind of a parallelogram. And the same thing with the bishop. The bishop has two different angles from which to attack any particular point on the board. So anyway, that's a little bit of a monologue there, but I wanted to remind myself about the rule of two because I forgot it here. And so now is an interesting sequence here where we both find the best moves. So boom. That's probably what he'd been thinking when he put the rook there. Or maybe he found it after I played the fork, but in any case, it's more than just escaping from the fork. It's also making a really big threat here. In fact, it's a threat of mate because the knight is covering this escape square. So the rook comes here, comes to g7, and then pulls back to g6. There's a discovered check on that diagonal, and the king has no escape because the knight is covering the f7 square. So really dangerous position. I need to block this diagonal, and the only way to do it is with the rook f6. And so that is the best move. It's pretty much the only move that keeps me in the game, although white is better after this with this move he played. Rook takes f5. That's the best move in this position. Bishop takes f6 is also good, but it's complicated here. So I take back. Now there's two things hanging, right? The rook is hanging, the knight is hanging. So he can save the rook. I mean, he can save the knight and give up the rook because he has this fork here now. And then he can win my rook. I take back. And the final result of that, well, he's going to save his rook. The final result of that is that I've got two bishops against a rook, which is an advantage. But he has two extra pawns. So that is, overall, it's an edge to white, about a +1 advantage to white. But this is stronger, actually. Taking the pawn here is also about a +1 edge to white. And now I blunder. So we had 3 moves in a row where we both found the best move, and now I blunder with h6. So the strongest move for black here, the best defense, is rook to g6. And then the best move for white is just to retreat. And if we count the material, we have 2 rooks and 2 minor pieces each, and white is a pawn up, and the chess engine gives white a +1 advantage. There are still threats. He's got a problem on the back rank here, and I've got a pair of bishops that are looking pretty good, but his pieces are active and he can defend the threats, and he's just a pawn up, basically. So that would be best play. Instead I played h6, counterattacking the knight, and here he should play like this. He should finally grab the exchange here. I should take the bishop. Well, I guess I have to take the bishop. And then the knight comes into h7. And this is just winning. He's got this fork threat again. And if we count the material, I have 1 rook and 2 bishops. He has 2 rooks and a knight. So he's up the exchange, plus he's up some material, and he's continuing to attack. So just a winning position. So he must have had some kind of miscalculation here. He played rook takes g7 check, and I just take back. I mean, my moves are almost forced here, and then he just comes out of this sequence behind. So let's see. He played rook takes f6, and yeah, maybe he thought this discovered check here was going to kill me, but it doesn't actually. I can just take that knight, and he can do the discovered check, but I can defend the rook, and my rook is defending the bishop. So I get to hold on to my extra piece here. Let's see, he tried some more checks, and then he went h3 here to save himself from the back rank problems, and I went rook d8. I'm still going to try and threaten his king here. This turned out to be very important. Let's see, he played rook takes c6. So he's got 1, 2 versus 5. He's got 3 pawns for the piece at this point, but his king position is a bit weak, so I am actually better through all of this. even though materially it's actually about even at this point. Let's see, he went here with the king, and then I played king d7, chasing his rook away and preparing bishop to c7 to set up those tactics that we saw in the game. He goes rook g6, and I went bishop c7 check. Went g3. So now there's a mate. No, there's not a mate threat yet there. I have to put the bishop on f3. Potential mating ideas for the king in the corner. Yeah, he went, let's see, what was the last move? He went g3. I went bishop f3. Okay, yeah, so it was my move at that point. So I set up the mating idea here. So he went to rook g7 check, and I went king c6. Actually, a slight mistake, because he could have taken the bishop off and tried to play on like this, although he is down a whole rook. But he has a bunch of pawns. I mean, he could try that. So the simplest win for me is to just leave my bishop there. He can't take it because the mate is hanging. Let's see, he can check again, and then I go here. I just have to stop the checks. And at some point he can't. He has no more checks, and then he gets mated. So that's the simplest way to win. Instead, I went here, and he should have taken my bishop. Instead, he checked up here, and I tucked my king away. So now there's no more checks, and there's really nothing he can do. It's a forced mate. In any case, he decided to just grab a pawn and let me mate him. So that's how the game ended. Anyway, that was a fun game, a real tactical workout with the minor pieces. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye.